Hi. First of all, very sorry that I can't be with you today at the ASE conference. I will be joining tonight and I will be there all day tomorrow. So hopefully, if anybody's got any questions about what I'm going to say, they'll be able to find me and we'll be able to follow up a little bit. And I also need to say thank you both to Grace and to Nick for holding this session as well today. It's a really exciting opportunity to be able to introduce you to a methodology that we've been using to structure lessons, to structure learning and learning design over many, many years. And anybody who's worked with me will probably always say that that's one of the things that Lynn always requires of us is to think about the 7 E's, as we call it. Now, let's just caveat that with the fact that I didn't invent the 7 E's. You'll be able to read more from a research base in terms of who did, but I've very much adopted the 7 E's into my style of curriculum development and teacher professional learning for a few key reasons, mainly because it enables me to be what I call a constructivist in my approach, a social constructivist at that. And that's a theory of learning which really embodies and embraces the fact that I believe that learners uh, learn in social settings by exploring. You'll be maybe familiar with the work that we've recently done on the purposeful practical work report. And so going through a 7 E's cycle enables me to start by questioning how do I want to engage those young learners and where are they currently at? And then how can I really construct a learning environment which gets them to explore for themselves in order to be able to cognitively move and develop in their thinking. So in this first little bit of the session, I'd like to just give you an introduction to what the 7 E's are. And around your tables, I think you have got copies of the 7 E's cycle to hand. Maybe you've already worked with it, thinking about how those E's fall out into a structure. So sometimes we talk about 5 E's and sometimes we talk about 7. And maybe that's a really good way to start thinking about this. When I'm talking about a 5 E's, it's just a shorter time scale within which I work. And at that point, I'll be looking at how we engage children, how we elicit what they think, how we explain to them where we want to move forward from, and then how we get them to explore and evaluate their learning. And that's very much the way I do it. You'll probably hear in some of what I've just said there that I did engage, elicit, explain, explore, and evaluate. If you Google the 7 E's, you'll probably find it says that the explain and the explore are the other way around. And that's for you to decide on which way you feel that learning pedagogy is the best in your environment. But for me, it's always worked well that way. And then when we think about the 7 E's, that is simply extending that approach from engaging, eliciting, explaining, exploring, and evaluating to going a bit deeper, where we introduce elaborating. The elaborating is when we take an idea from one setting of learning into another. So we elaborate it, we take that bit of learning and we take it into a new setting or a new use of the same skills. And then extending, which would be pushing that learning on even further at the end. So let me just go back to those E's again. So, what do we do when we engage a learner? At this point, what I'd have in my mind is the learning outcome. And please always do start with a very clear learning outcome. What do you want those children to achieve by the end of this lesson? Or range of lessons, because a 7 E's or a 5 E's cycle doesn't always just have to be one lesson. It could be over a series of lessons. And sometimes in our primary science work, it's probably due to time constraints, probably better to think that way. Have the learning outcome. What do you want them to learn? What do you want them to have developed skills wise or knowledge wise, understanding wise by the end of this learning period? And how are you going to engage them? How are you going to get them hooked and trapped into this fascinating area and space where they really want to invest and motivate their energy towards learning? There's been a big shift towards watching videos, that kind of thing, which, okay, during COVID was an absolutely fundamental way of getting young people engaged. Let's not just fall into that trap. Let's think about those experiences that we can engage children into the learning experience. We want them to dive deep initially into that space and to be fascinated about something, about the topic that you are engaging them with. Now, when in that space, talk will emerge, whether that's in their head or with others, which will allow you them to start getting into the space, into the zone, to be able to share where they currently are at in their thinking. And this is the elicit. The engage with primes them for you then to ask, what do you think about these ideas? And this will be eliciting how close to that learning objective that young person or that learner is. Now, if at this point you realise that the learner has already got the concepts or skills or understanding that you've got, it means to you as a teacher that now you need to maybe reframe this lesson, differentiate and move it on, because all otherwise you're going to be doing is retreading old ground. Now, of course, that might be the purpose of the lesson, but in most lessons, we're going to be wanting to progress and move learning forward. So the elicit is vital. Getting into a young person or learner's mindset to see how close to the learning objective they currently are. And to construct an activity in order to be able to do that. It can be through conversation, it can be through demonstration in some way. It can be doing things like that we've seen really well used in the Explorify resource, for instance. Odd one out, big questions, opportunities for the children to release and expose their learning so that you as a teacher really understand their preconceptions. There might be areas where you think that the scientific understanding isn't in line with traditional understandings, and that's fine. They are where they are, and that might be the shift that you then spot that you need to make. So it is about you understanding as a teacher where your learners' starting points are at. Without that, then we can't continue the learning cycle. Jump this, and we potentially fail to move those learners on. You either might go far beyond where they're at, and you aren't bringing any learning forward from retrieval or anything else, or you might just be retreading old ground, which eventually leads to motivation drop off and young people thinking, well, how's the science? What's science got to do with me? So we've engaged them in the concept. We've elicited, okay, you know this much, and I want you to go to this space. And I now know as a teacher the distance I would like you to travel within the period of the learning opportunities that I'm now going to give you. So of course I need to now explain where we're at. So I'm either going to explain how we're going to go about a task, but I can also be explaining some scientific concepts, some knowledge base. I can be teaching some information, whether that's through practical work or whether that's through more didactic styles of knowledge transfer. But this is the point where you as a teacher are leading the learning. You are constructing that opportunity and you'll explain to the children what's going to happen next or what new information that you'd like them to think about. And once you've managed to do that, and that could be through PowerPoint slides, it could be through demonstration, verbal inputs, however you might, worksheets, however you wish to do that, then it's about exploring, isn't it? It's about those young people having a genuine connection with the learning that you're wanting them to have. So exploring is absolutely fundamental. And as a social constructivist, I always see that as a collaborative opportunity, one where I would be expecting talk to happen. I would be expecting questioning to happen, both from myself, questioning the young people, but also the questioning from them to each other and back to me. And at this point of exploring, it could be a practical work, it might be inside the classroom, or it might be out. And if doing practicals, it will be about gathering evidence, won't it? It'll be about measuring things, finding things out, using the scientific method. From which, if we were then moving towards a 5E cycle, would mean us starting to then evaluate. What conclusions can we draw? But it's more than conclusions. It's about then getting to the point towards the end of this learning cycle or to the end of the lesson where we evaluate. And the evaluate goes back to the learning outcome. Have I managed to get you to the point where you now know what I would wish you to know? Have I managed to move you from where you were in your where I elicited your understanding and bridged and moved you forward to a new space in your learning understanding? So this is the gauging bit, which obviously all of the work done by Sarah Earle through TAPS and all of the other formative and summative assessments can enable us to get into understanding how far that learner has moved. Only to then be able to go back, and should we then want to go back through it, enabling us to go back to engaging them again, eliciting where they're on, and here we are again, and we are learning all the way through. Adding elaborating in would simply mean at the point of exploring, they would explore in one context, and then I would say, okay, how can we use and apply the skills and the knowledge you've developed in a new learning context? It might be a more challenging learning context. It might be in a different learning context. but it's just another opportunity to extend that skills or that knowledge base in a different way, which gives you confidence as a teacher that they've really got it. They've really got that understanding because they can apply that learning in a different setting. The extend can come after all of this and takes us into a different space. How could we extend that learning further? How can we draw it out? How can we take that learning into different contexts, into different scenarios, into different settings, or take those skills into different places? The extend is not just going broader, but it's also going deeper. So to me, that's the 7 E's or the 5 E's. I hope you have engaged with it in a really interesting way and maybe even reflect on some of the activities that we've designed in our projects and programs to see how you feel that that works. I'd be interested in getting your feedback, but for now, it's back to Nicola and it's back to Grace.